Hi there, this is Ronnie coming at you with, not so much a rant, but just me, voicing an opinion on a Friday evening. I was looking at a couple of videos of music from the Atari ST, and there's a lot of comments. Some people like it, some people not, blah 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 blah. But amongst them were a couple of comments, and I've seen a lot of these comments, which basically boiled down to Atari ST is shit, Amiga rules, blah 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 blah. And these computers were at their height in the sort of late 80s into the early, I suppose mid 90s just, was when they were at their height. So that's about 20 years since they were actually, in and around. And it fascinates me that the same old schoolyard finger pointing still goes on. And I just never got into it. Repetition of history here, but it's relevant. First home computer I ever had was a Sinclair ZX Spectrum. It's 48K model, which I got in 1984. Now at the time, here in the UK, there were a slew of 8-bit computers. Some were well known. I think some of them were more successful in America than they were in Britain. I'm thinking specifically of the Atari 8-bit line. I mean, they sold well here, but they were nowhere near as successful here as they were, I think, in America. Whereas here in the UK, the heavy hitters in terms of sales were the Spectrum, the Commodore 64, the Amstrad CPC 464, and the Acorn Electron. There were other computers, but those four were really the sellers. Particularly the Spectrum and the Commodore 64. And getting back into sort of retro gaming as I have the last couple of years, having a Spectrum emulator, I've been watching a lot of channels that do comparison videos. And I find them fascinating because I never got into the edition wars. When I certainly from someone who grew up with a 48K Specky, when you heard the Commodore 64's SID chip, you just had to sit back and salute. And just accept that sonically the Commodore 64 just, owned the Specky. In terms of colours, it obviously had more than the Spectrum. My personal opinion is that graphically the Specky actually had it over the Commodore 64, but that's one of those, up and down kind of, some people will agree, some people won't. The point is, I just never saw the point of the edition war. Time moved on, and I ended up getting a Commodore Amiga. Strangely, a friend of mine had an Atari ST, and I saw some games that he had for his Atari ST, and it just blew me away. Given that my sort of knowledge of gaming with the 48K Spectrum he put on the Atari ST version of Rainbow Islands, and I just went, wow. You know, my eyes kind of bulged out my sockets. And he showed me Xenon 2, and again I was like, wow. Because when you compared the Atari and the Spectrum, it was just, it was amazing. When I got round to buying one, however, I was motivated by a couple of things. At the time, they were both being sold for the same price at the electronics store where my dad had one of those credit cards. You could buy it on the card, you could pay it off. You know, store card things. So I bought it, and 3 years insurance. And they were both being sold for the same price. It was about 400 quid. And I decided I was going to buy one. And the Atari ST was pretty much bare bones at that time. And the Amiga 500 came with the Batman pack, which was the computer and TV modulator and a small selection of games. It was Batman the Movie, New Zealand Story, F-18 Interceptor, and Deluxe Paint 2. You know, when I got my Speccy, it came with 6 games. So the idea of getting a computer which came with some games with it as a start off made more sense to me. Also, amongst my sort of immediate close circle of friends at that time, more people had Amigas than Atari STs. Now, I'm not one for following the herd as a rule, but it meant that we could all sort of swap and borrow stuff more readily. So it made more financial sense for me to do that. So that was fine. I don't regret buying the Amiga, and I do think, pound for pound, it was the right choice for me, and I do think technically it's better than the Atari ST, but I don't make fun of Atari ST on it, because I remember sitting there looking at Rainbow Islands and being totally floored by it, looking at Xenon 2 and being totally floored by it. All these amazing games, it was just, you know, coming from a Spectrum. So I don't get it. I don't get the sort of wars. I didn't get them then. And to me, it makes even less sense now. The computers are no more, unless you count emulation. Now, I have 2 emulators. Okay, technically 3 because I've got 2 for the Spectrum. I have, you know, 2. I had 1 and I got another one because there was a couple of games which wouldn't work quite right on one of my Spectrum emulators, which works on the other one, and vice versa. So I've got emulators for the Spectrum, and I've got an emulator for the Amiga. And the reason for those is simple. Those were the 2 computers I owned as I grew up. It's the ones I remember with regards to playing games on. If I had been someone who had grown up with a Commodore 64 and an Atari ST, it would have been a Commodore 64 and Atari ST emulator I would have been hunting down. I'm nostalgic that way. So I don't get the wars. I think it's one thing to do comparisons. I like seeing the comparison videos. I think they're great. I think it's interesting to see how different programmers handled the different specifications to try and get a version of a particular game onto that system. So I'm almost more interested in the similarities rather than the differences, or where there is a great deal of very obvious difference. You know, comparing a 16-bit with an 8-bit is really looking at how well the computers handle the same game. And I've done a couple of videos on sort of comparisons of Spectrum and Amiga games for that reason. And it's not about, you know, making fun of the lesser model. It's about saying, you know, actually the lesser model, given its, you know, lower specifications, did really well doing this. So I don't get the edition wars. I really don't. I've never quite understood it, and I still don't. And I find it. I mean, I understand a bit of banter, although after 20 years, I think the banter's, you know, coming across a little silly now. But I understand a bit of friendly banter. But some of the comments are quite childish, really, and you can see it. My personal opinion is the Speccy was a great machine at certain things, as were all the 8-bits. Some were better at some things better than others, but, you know, they were all good machines and fun, and if that's the machine you grew up with, if that's the machine you love, great. You know, don't listen to the naysayers who say, you know, your computer was shit. Well, quite frankly, you know, they were all pretty mints in their own way. You know, just love them. Same with the Amiga and Atari ST, for fuck's sake. You know, let's enjoy the game. You know, just enjoy them for what they were. Wonderful computers with lots of great games on them. Enjoy them. If you owned an Atari ST, great. It was a great machine. It really was. If you owned an Amiga, great. It was a great machine. It really was. You know, banter's one thing, but when you still see people, you know, sort of going, the Atari was better than the Amiga was better than the Atari, and then, you know, flying insults at each other, it's just a bit naff, really. So that's my thoughts. If you're still into sort of retro, sort of 8-bit, 16-bit computers, love them, enjoy them, play with them, great. If it's emulators that you use, like myself now, love them, enjoy them, play them, great. Don't worry what other people think of a particular computer. It's none of their business, quite frankly. Okay?